For the first time on television, Matt Dillon, Andrew McCarthy, Kansas. Monday night at 7 on Channel 9. This is Chicago's Midday News.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Sanders. Coming up in the Midday News, President Bush joins the chorus of criticism on how the Senate handled the Supreme Court nomination of Clarence Thomas. Score another victory for the president. The Senate has failed to override Bush's veto of a measure to extend unemployment benefits. The president appoints a new U.S. Attorney General, and the French get their own version of Disney World. All those stories straight ahead of the Midday News. Right now, here's Tom Skilling.
And Steve, we're in the process of recovering from a near 50-year-old record low that we broke last night. We went down to 28 degrees at O'Hare Field, so a hard freeze across much of the area. Now a sharp return to Indian summer, but only for one day. New guidance shows a cold weekend ahead and a big warm-up again next week. Fast-changing weather events, and we'll cover all of them on the weather segment coming up later on. But here is Steve now with the news.
Thank you, Tom. In Washington this afternoon, President Bush says he's got some ideas on how to improve the way the Senate handles Supreme Court nominees. The president's comments come after the nasty and sordid Senate battle over Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas. The Senate finally confirmed Thomas to the High Court last night by its most narrow margin in history. Skip Lozier has more.
The yeas are 52. And the nays are 48. The nomination of Clarence Thomas of Georgia to be Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court is hereby confirmed.
It's the answer to a prayer for the family and friends of Clarence Thomas in his boyhood home of Pinpoint, Georgia, and their joy is overwhelming. But Thomas's mother has not forgotten her son's anguish and what pulled him through it.
With all his trials he went through, God brought him through. And I know God had the last word.
The newest and youngest Supreme Court justice was at home with his wife when he was confirmed. He emerged in the rain to thank his family, God, and the American people.
I'd like to thank this country for the things it stands for, and the people for the things that we stand for, our ideals. And I'd like to think that, at least in my life and our lives, that we can uphold those ideals.
Anita Hill was back at the University of Oklahoma Law School Tuesday, trying her best to stay out of the limelight. Hill says she did the right thing by, as she puts it, telling the truth. And she hopes other women will follow her lead.
It's almost as though a silence has been broken, and women who are talking about experiences that they had never spoken about before. And that should not die.
What does Thomas's mother think of Anita Hill?
And you don't get angry. You love your enemy as well as you do your friends.
The Hill-Thomas controversy has created deep divisions in the country and in the Senate, where the usual comedy was replaced by acrimony. But Thomas calls for healing.
But this is more time for healing, not a time for anger or for animus or animosity.
President Bush phoned Thomas after the vote to congratulate him, and in a statement said Judge Thomas showed Congress and the nation that he is a man of honesty, dedication, and commitment. But the Senate's confidence in Thomas is less than overwhelming. More votes were cast against Thomas than have ever been cast against any other person ever confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Skip Lozier, CNN, Washington.
Well, President Bush made a nomination today to his administration's top legal job. He selected acting Attorney General William Barr to take over the post full-time. Barr would succeed William Thornburg, who resigned in early August. In some other news, President Bush is feeling his veto power this afternoon. The Senate just failed to override the president's veto of a bill extending unemployment benefits. It was upheld 65 to 35, 2 votes shy of the 2/3 needed to override. The $6.4 billion bill would have provided up to 20 more weeks of unemployment benefits for jobless Americans. The president has called the legislation a budget buster. Just how far can anti-abortion protesters go? That question is before the Supreme Court today as the 8 seated justices decide if federal courts can prohibit demonstrators from blocking abortion clinics. Protesters were outside the court building in Washington today. They say the federal courts are infringing on states' rights. Last month, a federal judge in Kansas ordered the group Operation Rescue to stop blocking clinics in Wichita, saying they were violating the rights of women seeking abortions. At issue is whether an 1871 Civil Rights Act intended to protect blacks from the Ku Klux Klan can be used by the federal courts to protect the rights of abortion patients. Another case the High Court is considering deals with a challenge to the so-called Son of Sam laws. More than 40 states have such legislation which bars criminal profiting directly from books or movies about their crimes. Norma Quarles picks up the story.
The lawyer for accused serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer says publishers of magazines and books are eager to have Dahmer write the story of his crimes. Under present law, the profits from his story would not go to him, but into a special fund so families of his victims suing for damages could collect from that fund. 42 states have a so-called Son of Sam statute, instituted first in New York in 1977 when David Berkowitz, a serial killer, stalked the city, saying his orders came from a voice called Son of Sam. In recent years, profits from a number of books have been attached. Convicted murderer Jean Harris lost a lower court battle to control $90,000 from writing her story, Stranger in Two Worlds. Simon & Schuster, publishers of Wise Guy, the biography of mobster Henry Hill, written by Nicholas Pileggi, sued, and the case has now gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. Publishers say the law violates the First Amendment.
It has the inevitable effect of discouraging the creation of a number of works dealing in some manner with the subject of crime, criminal activity, the criminal mind.
Barbara Leake, chairman of the New York State Crime Victims Board, disagrees.
I don't believe it stifles the flow. I think anyone who wants to write, who wants to tell a story, will tell a story.
I think it's simply too simplistic to suggest that people will willy-nilly tell their stories for the sheer enjoyment of it or the sheer publicity of it. In fact, I think the record demonstrates that in many, many cases, unless there is some opportunity to pay the collaborator for his or her efforts, the work simply won't be created at all.
In my considered opinion, every time that story is retold, that victim is again victimized.
Constitutional lawyer Floyd Abrams also sees the statute as a penalty on speech and a violation of the First Amendment.
It's a sort of tax on expression, a tax on free expression. And in a way, it's a tax on unpopular, distasteful, offensive free expression. But as a matter of First Amendment law, what we say is you can't do that.
But Abrams concedes convincing this Supreme Court that the statute is a violation of the First Amendment will not be an easy task. Norma Quarles, CNN, New York.
Lawyers for the Globe today are asking a Florida judge to dismiss criminal charges against the supermarket tabloid for publishing the name of a woman who says William Kennedy Smith raped her. In wrapping up 3 days of testimony, the Globe's attorneys called the Florida law protecting sex crime victims a violation of the First Amendment. Meanwhile, the alleged victim in the case is meeting with Smith's attorney for the first time. Charles Jaco looks at some of the quirks in this made-for-the-tabloids case.
William Kennedy Smith's alleged victim arrived Tuesday for what could be 3 days of questioning by Smith's attorneys. It's been almost 7 months since the alleged rape, March 30th. The delay by Smith's lawyers in taking her statement is one more unusual aspect to an already twisted case. Judge Mary Lupo has ordered Smith's trial to start December 2nd and vows it'll be over by Christmas, even if sessions have to be held on Saturdays and Sundays.
It's highly unusual. I have never seen a judge set a finishing date, per se, for a trial. I understand the rationale in this case to want to finish before the holidays, but it's a very unusual step to take.
Then there's the gag order that isn't. The judge slapped a gag order on lawyers, Smith, the alleged victim, Senator Kennedy, and anyone else remotely connected to the trial to try to keep possibly prejudicial pretrial publicity to a minimum. But court documents are public, so details on everything from Smith's sexual history to the alleged victims are ending up in the media thanks to those documents. So much for a gag order controlling pretrial publicity. A lot of that publicity has been of the lurid variety.
It degenerated very early on. I feel that this is probably the most blown out of proportion case I've ever seen, and I think most lawyers around here feel the same way.
Because the Kennedys have had a home in Palm Beach for decades, there have been suggestions that trial be moved from this enclave of the hyper-rich to elsewhere in Florida, but people across the United States have some sort of opinion already. In Detroit, for example.
You can buy his way out.